Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for
We're going to begin. We're going to begin in just a minute or two. We're just going to allow a few minutes for others to join on. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to begin in just a minute or two. We're just allowing time to get everybody signed in here before we get underway. Okay, I think we can get started. Well, thanks everyone for joining our webinar today on New Jersey's transportation future. My name is Tom Gilbert, and I'm the campaign director for Rethink Energy New Jersey and the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. We have an exciting program for you today, but before we begin, I just want to go over a couple of logistics. If you aren't already, please put yourself on mute, and that will help to eliminate any distractions and background noise. And in addition, just so everyone knows at the outset, we are recording this webinar, and we will be sharing it with the participants after the event. Lastly, please ask any and all questions that you might have through the chat box. And we have 2 allotted Q&A sessions throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best to answer as many of your questions as we can. So now let's get into our discussion. This is the 3rd webinar in a series about the climate crisis and New Jersey's leadership in creating a clean energy future. Addressing the climate crisis obviously requires multiple strategies, including rapidly expanding clean energy and reducing the use of fossil fuels. But reducing emissions in the transportation sector is clearly a very large piece of this puzzle. But what does that really mean? Today we have a great lineup of experts and advocates who are going to tell us exactly that. We have Jana Chernetz, who's Deputy Director and Director of New Jersey Policy for the Tri-State Transportation Campaign. And she's going to provide us with a glimpse of where we are now on transportation in New Jersey and a vision of what a modernized transportation system looks like and what some of the barriers are. Jana will be followed by Kate Miguel, clean energy advocate from Isles, who will provide us with some real-time examples in New Jersey of how we are pursuing this transportation future. And we'll finish up with a brief discussion on some of the policy drivers making this future happen that will be led by Ed Potosnik, Executive Director for New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. But before we go any further, we have a quick quiz for all of you. So in terms of reducing emissions and addressing the climate crisis, what percentage of economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions is the transportation system responsible for in New Jersey? So please go ahead and take a moment and take your best guess or provide your answer if you know, and we'll show the results in just a minute. I'd like to say there's a prize, but there isn't. Other than feeling smart if you get the right answer. Okay, I think we're gonna drum roll, please. Okay, so very interesting. So it looks like most people said either 31 to 40% or greater than 40%. So for those of you that said greater than 41%, you are correct. So as you can see from this graphic here, the transportation sector is responsible for 45% of New Jersey's greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see the other sectors that are the major sources of emissions in the state as well in the graphic. And so this means that if we're going to get serious about climate action, we have to think critically about how we can decarbonize the transportation sector, but also ensure that we can still transport obviously the people, the goods, and the services across the state to meet the needs of our growing and changing economy. Not only does the transportation sector play a huge role in greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also the primary contributor to localized air pollution. especially in environmental justice communities that are predominantly Black and brown and low income communities. Think about our cities and all of the heavy duty trucks driving down narrow roads and the proximity of those communities to ports and airports and bus terminals and major highways. Our transportation sector is directly connected to our air quality, and nothing makes that clearer than what we experienced during this pandemic. In the beginning months of the lockdown, the amount that people were driving plummeted, and we saw drastic reductions in emissions locally and globally. And many of you probably all saw pictures of reduced pollution in cities across the world with blue skies instead of smog. But as our economy started to open up again and people began moving around, those benefits of reduced emissions and pollution dissipated. And so now what we need is to put in place the strategies that can reduce emissions from the transportation sector over the long term. A recent scientific report released by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection really highlighted the significant impacts of climate change that New Jersey is already experiencing and are likely are projected to worsen, from increased flooding and strong storms to sea level rise and water quality impacts, just to name a few. New Jersey is one of the fastest warming states in the country and is really on the front lines of the climate crisis. Fortunately, our state, led by Governor Murphy and the legislature, has taken leadership in combating climate change and has put in place several nation-leading policies to address this crisis. For example, the Strengthened Global Warming Response Act requires the New Jersey DEP now to adopt regulations to reduce emissions 80% economy-wide by mid-century, and establish interim benchmarks to ensure that we are on track to meet those goals. So the GWRA is a major catalyst for our decarbonization efforts, including the transportation sector. There are many other policies as well, which you're going to hear more about today. But what does this mean for the future of transportation? How do we electrify while expanding access to services and rethinking what our transportation system looks like? And that's what we're going to learn more about today. So with that, I'm now going to hand it off to Jana from the Tri-State Transportation Campaign to lead us into our transportation future. Take it away, Jana.
Thanks, Tom. Again, I'm Jana Chernitz. I'm the Deputy Director and the Director of New Jersey Policy for Tri-State Transportation Campaign. We are a nonprofit, a nonpartisan nonprofit working to reduce dependency on automobiles in the tri-state area, which is New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Predominantly in New York, it would be downstate. So I just like to start, talking a bit about where we are in New Jersey. I mean, I'm trying to give a very, very broad overview. Any of the things I talk about today could be webinars in and of themselves. So first of all, the way we're going to move forward, if we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, number one has to be reducing VMT, reducing our vehicle miles traveled. But we have to know where we're starting from. So how much do we drive in New Jersey? So this is, it's a little bit of a fine print, I hope you can all see, but this is from NJDOT's website. And it illustrates just the trajectory that we are on as a state with our over-reliance on the single occupancy vehicle. It starts back at 1994, and you'll see a steady increase over the years, building up into 2008, which we all know was the recession where we saw a significant drop. But since 2008, we're again moving forward and increasing our VMT, albeit not as the rate prior to 2008. But we are slowly ramping back up with our driving and now relying on our automobiles. A few things from 2008 that we can pretty much guess is the reason why we're seeing this is the rebound of the economy, but might not be as much because the way we do business and our business landscape has been changing with technology. With COVID, however, and I'd like to talk a little bit about COVID and weave that into where we are, because that obviously has turned everything on its head and has affected every way of life, but especially the way we move about in the state. And when we're looking into the future looked very different back in February as it does now. There's always a level of uncertainty, but granted, with COVID and our future, that level of uncertainty is certainly highlighted. But when we're looking at how much we drive, New Jersey is, interestingly enough, per capita, our VMT is actually the lowest 10 of the country. Wyoming being the highest for vehicle miles traveled per capita, which I thought was really interesting. And we're still below average in comparison to other states, but that does not mean that we don't have to do anything about VMT. As Tom pointed out, almost half of our greenhouse gas emissions come from the environmental sector. And therefore, if we're going to combat this, the number one priority needs to be reducing vehicle miles traveled. So how else do people move around in the state? Well, New Jersey Transit. So how is New Jersey Transit ridership looking? This is a snapshot from 2019 or 2018, I'm sorry. There's just under 1 million weekday unlinked passenger trips, because obviously people take more than one mode, or during the day, or they change if they don't have a one-seat ride. So this is the best way to capture our ridership. Bus is the predominant source of people moving on public transportation, almost 500,000 weekday passengers, followed by rail. And the reason why we see bus having more passengers, number one, because people generally use bus not only to go to New York City, which is really where a lot of the focus is on rail, but to move within the state. We have 11% of the people in the state do not own vehicles, therefore they rely on New Jersey Transit ridership. But you see a different kind of passenger on bus, not just your Monday through Friday commuter, but people whose primary source of transportation is public transportation, and then followed by light rail, access link, and vanpool. But we're seeing now the importance of New Jersey Transit. If you can remember, the Murphy campaign was really focusing on the importance that transit plays in New Jersey's economy and moving people around. It was Superstorm Sandy really highlighted the importance of public transportation when the Hudson tunnels were taken out because of the storm. Governor Christie canceling the ARC project, which we would have had the redundancy that we needed under the Hudson River. But within the past decade, we've really started to pay attention to our investment in public transportation as being vital for the state. So just how much emphasis are we putting on our transportation infrastructure? Are we putting the dollars behind the understanding of how it is such a priority? So what I wanted to do is just show a little snapshot of where we are in transportation capital spending, because operating is a completely different thing. But just to give a general idea, what are we spending in New Jersey? So for NJDOT's fiscal year 20 capital plan, it's about $2.3 billion, which actually sounds like a lot of money, but it's actually a historically stagnant spending plan for the state if you take into consider inflation. In 2016, there was the gas tax increase. The gas tax goes to the TTF, which is the Transportation Trust Fund. And that is where New Jersey gets its capital dollars predominantly. It was a 23-cent gas tax increase in 2016. And if you're paying attention to the news in the past couple of days, you'll know that our gas tax is going up. It is a fluid gas tax. The point is to have $2 billion going into the trust fund every year. So if VMT goes up, the gas tax goes down. If VMT goes down, the gas tax goes up. Well, what happens with COVID, with the reduction in VMT, and as you saw from the previous slides, we're looking at potentially a substantial gas tax increase. But these are things that are really important because this is where we're getting the money to spend on the infrastructure that is needed. New Jersey Transit is also funded through the TTF, other funding sources, obviously the federal government, but I want to focus solely on New Jersey state investment. There's a $1.4 billion capital plan for New Jersey Transit annually, but don't want to mislead. Not all of that money is actually going to transit. They have an overarching funding issue where they're transferring capital money over to operating at a tune of $460 million a year generally is going over there. Since they started doing this, it's been over $11 billion that has been siphoned from the capital budget to meet their operating needs. So this does not bode well for a healthy public transit system that's going to help the state reduce VMT and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So with that said, where else are we spending our money in New Jersey? We have the New Jersey Turnpike. So the New Jersey Turnpike Authority was just a little bit of a controversy in March, if anyone out there was paying attention to what was going on outside of COVID. So during March, or the first week of the lockdown order, the Turnpike Authority moved forward with a 20-year capital plan and toll hike. Public information sessions and public hearings were still held during the lockdown orders, and they still moved forward with this plan that was obviously created pre-COVID. Of this $24 billion capital plan, 50 major projects that are 50 major projects for both the Turnpike Authority and the Parkway. 13 of the projects at a cost of $16 billion are going to widen over 100 miles of roadway on just these two roads in the state. This is completely contrary to the goal of reducing VMT. There is the theory of induced demand. You build it, they will come, and then you're going to end up with the same problem that you had before, which is congestion. New Jersey has a substantial congestion problem, and building more roadways is not going to make it better. It might reduce it for a little bit, but eventually you're going to end up with the exact same problem that your widening was supposed to alleviate. So, this is an indication of, unfortunately, where New Jersey is growing, which is really not where we need to be in terms of our goals of reducing VMT and greenhouse gas emissions. So with that, where do we want to be? So let's focus a little bit on New Jersey Transit, because again, that is one of the best ways to reduce VMT and greenhouse gas emissions. As I said, public transportation was a platform upon which the governor was running, and he has placed a lot of emphasis in his administration into reforming the agency. So there are a lot of things that have been going on in the state in the past 3 years with transit, but I just wanted to point out a few of the notable wins and the strides that we're making. This year, just recently, the agency released a 10-year strategic plan. This is the first time this agency's ever done that. You must be scratching your head going, how do you have an agency without a strategic plan? Well, New Jersey Transit is an example of what happens when you have an agency without a strategic plan, living year to year, just keeping the lights on, not knowing where they're going and how they're going to meet those needs. Also, along with that was a $17 billion 5-year capital plan. And I wanted to note that in this capital plan, which you can find on NJ Transit's website, $5.78 billion of identified projects do not have identified revenue coming in. So clearly we're very, very far behind in meeting the needs of New Jersey Transit in order to meet the needs of the state. Two pieces of legislation that were notable wins was the New Jersey Transit Reform Bill that was signed in December of 18. That was Bill S630, if any of you want to go and look at that. What it did was it increased transparency and accountability to the riders, and most importantly, it restructured the board of directors. The board of directors was an area of controversy for the past decade or so, where they seemed to be just it was a very small pool of people, and taking a look at how New Jersey Transit compared to other agencies around the country, an outlier in that composition. So the biggest move was expanding the board and requiring expertise, and especially rail riders and bus riders represented on there. Although this bill was signed in December of 18, here we are sitting here in July of 20, and unfortunately the board is not yet filled. The second notable win was S2252, which was signed this past January. I think, I keep forgetting, time is just kind of crazy right now. And in there is New Jersey Transit's statutory requirement to transition to an all-EV bus fleet, which I will be talking about later in the slides. But one of the biggest challenges, and that's going to stand in the way of everything that ails New Jersey Transit, is funding. I talked a little bit about that before. New Jersey Transit, their entire funding scheme, whether it's operating or capital, is really, really holding the agency back for meeting the needs of its employees and the needs of the state. So those are the biggest challenges in terms of New Jersey Transit. Next slide. Okay, so I talked about electric buses. So where do we need to go to move forward to meeting our goals that we were talking about? New Jersey, so there was a large effort in the past 2 years to get some sort of commitment from New Jersey Transit to electrify its bus fleet. So here we are sitting in, it was 2018 or 2019 when we started really in earnest to have some meaningful discussions with the legislature and the agency. And by that point, more than 60 transit agencies nationwide had already begun the process or were deeply embedded in the process of transitioning to an electric bus fleet and reducing their need for diesel buses. As you can see on the graph, how the entire bus fleet in the country has been slowly transitioning out of diesel to electric, but still New Jersey Transit was an outlier in making any kind of strides towards that. California, Chicago, Texas, Washington, Oregon, Minnesota, transit agencies in those states already far advanced in their transition. MTA had already made a commitment to transition to all an EV bus fleet by 2040, and New Jersey was nowhere even on that map. Thanks to S2252 really began to push New Jersey Transit into that commitment. So what did we get under S2252? So you'll see the slow bus transition. So therefore, after December 31st of 2032, all new purchases need to be electric buses. I think that would put a full transition to about 2044, where we would no longer see any diesel vehicles on the road. Definitely not in line with MTA's 2040 or the other agencies around the country, but definitely significant strides to that total transition. This was also mentioned. I pulled out the excerpt from their strategy, from their 10-year strategic plan to convert to clean energy by 2050. So with that said, we have a lot of work to do as advocates, especially as the funding issue is going to come into play, making sure that there's enough capital dollars to purchase the buses, and cooperation across agencies and the state as well to be moving forward to making sure that the electric infrastructure is there. Right now, there's a 8-bus pilot project slated for Camden, and another pilot in Newark on 1 bus line. But that's where we are sitting in 2020. Those are the only concrete plans of New Jersey Transit for electric buses. So we need to continue to push the agency to make sure that this is a priority. Next, what other programs does New Jersey have to help us move forward with our goals. There's the NJDOT Transit Village program. This is the emphasis on TOD, or mixed use development, around transit hubs. But we have to make sure that we have a robust transit network and transit system in New Jersey to make this kind of development possible. If you don't have the T, you're not going to be able to have the TOD. So New Jersey Transit Village program, it's roughly $1 million. Municipalities that have major transit hubs in their downtowns can apply to be designated Transit Village, big T, big V. And they receive assistance from the state. That's the next slide, right? Oh, no, sorry, go back. That slide, okay. Anyway, so eventually you will wean off this program and you just keep on going and developing this right way. But this is the kind of mixed use development. You've heard it: work, live, play, that reduces the demand for the single occupancy vehicle, having things within walking distance. This is especially important in New Jersey, where we are very dependent, unfortunately, on the car. This kind of development will then reduce that, again, reducing VMT, access to transit, so that if you do have to go somewhere, you can utilize public transportation. Okay, what other options are there as well? What can we do? We have micromobility. So what is micromobility? Bike shares, e-bikes, e-scooters. A little bit slower on the uptake in New Jersey. It's going to take a little bit of a while. Usually this is used for first mile, last mile problems, where it's oh so close, but yet so far away. It's going to take a mindset shift in order to have this more widely used in municipalities. There has been some controversy as some places have tried to roll it out. There's a very difference in market suppliers, and whether or not we have the street infrastructure to support safely moving with these choices. There were some issues in other cities in New Jersey where people were using this electric scooters and bicycles on sidewalks and not the street. So having the infrastructure to support these types of micromobility choices would definitely support making them more viable and safe. I just wanted to give an example where this has been positively used, and that is in Asbury Park, just to see the impact that introducing this type of mobility choice has. In August, which was the first month of operation in August 2019, there were 15,169 trips, and that estimated to avoid 5,056 car rides. So think about if this kind of mobility was deployed statewide, how many shorter trips could be avoided if people have access to these choices. And then the other thing is what kind of policies will support these overall goals of increasing access to transit, walking, biking, just ways, again, to reduce VMT, to support that TOD. What can we do as a state moving forward in policy? Well, we have what's called complete streets. We've had a complete streets policy in the state since 2009. And Montclair was the first municipality, which was actually a little bit before the state. So I'll give Montclair credit before the entire state. But since then, we have 8 counties that have passed policies and over 166 municipalities. But we still have a long way to go. Even just over 10 years later, we're not even halfway there with the state to making sure that we have this kind of approach to our roadway design. Complete streets, basically saying that streets are to be used for all users, not just cars from A to B. Now I have the model complete and green streets for all, because over the past 3 years, Tri-State, along with Voorhees Transportation Center at Rutgers, DOT, TMAs, MPOs, New Jersey Future, American Heart Association, AARP, you name it, a multitude of stakeholders came together to create a better, stronger policy that really and truly captured all benefits of smart road design. And that would include the health benefits, the economic benefits, the environmental benefits, safety benefits, and the equity benefits of road design. Equity needs to be in all of our policies, in all of the work that we do, and especially the way we build our roads. So this policy that we came up with encapsulates and captures all of those benefits and provides the checks and balances to the municipalities as they are applying these policies to how they're going to grow their municipalities. So with that said, again, all of this in and of itself can be an independent webinar for all these issues. But why should we care about this? We started this off with the environmental benefits of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But if we're going to have a better future and a path to a better New Jersey, we need to care about our transportation infrastructure. It is directly related to our health. The emissions, the diesel emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, are predominantly affecting our communities of concern, our environmental justice communities. Children have a higher rate of asthma, and when we see something like COVID that affects the respiratory system, they are going to be disproportionately affected. The safety, New Jersey is a pedestrian and bicycle focused state, meaning we have way more injuries, serious injuries and fatalities on our roadways in comparison to other states, and we need to do something about it. The environment, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also stormwater runoff, reducing impervious pavement, a better way to design our roadways. Equity, making sure that our investments do not isolate neighborhoods, but bring neighborhoods together. Is there access to transit? Is there access to downtown? Is it safe? And our economy. Right now, with COVID, we're seeing open streets where people are coming out and restaurants have to move outside. This concept of open streets is not something that was invented during COVID, but looking at active transportation and our roads and other ways to have people move about safely. For example, just for the economic perspective, Route 35 rebuild down the shore in Ocean County. Bike lanes were put in to give people another way to access businesses, because parking, as you know, is a commodity in the summer days. So thinking about how many people would go to businesses to buy T-shirts, ice cream cones, going out to dinner. Wouldn't it be nice to park your car and not have to use it again because you can safely remove them out by bicycle? Or tourism, and just increasing foot traffic in businesses is really going to help. So we should also care about that. And it's quality of life for people in the state, their ability to get to work in a reasonable amount of time. New Jersey is home to the largest mega commutes over 90 minutes or more. We have the most mega commuters in the country. So we need to care about transportation more than just to get from point A to B, because it really, really affects a multitude of things and how we live our life. So with that said, I will pass it back to Tom.
Great, thanks, Jana. That was a really comprehensive overview. And it did spark some questions. So there were a couple of participants who asked about a vehicle mile tax, and one in particular who was connecting that as a funding source for EVs in order to preempt a flat EV fee. So any reactions to those suggestions?
That's really important. I was watching some of those comments pop up as I was talking, and this is a very, very important discussion. As we're talking about transitioning to EVs, I did mention that the gas tax, the TTF, was the largest state source for capital funds for our transportation infrastructure. So as we're transitioning to EVs, we're also, on the other hand, taking away that revenue source. There has not been a substantial advocacy push, not substantial attention being paid by our legislature, by our administration, as to what kind of revenue source is going to replace that fairly. But it is a very, very important question as we're going to start to transition to electric vehicles, VMT being an optional one. But with that said, if our goal is to reduce VMT, we're also going to be reducing our revenue coming in if we're going to do that. So we have to think out of the box holistically and create creatively as to how we're going to solve our transportation funding problem, because once you try to solve one thing, you're creating a problem over here. So I think it's really important that we have this broader discussion, and it does not, our problem with our transportation does not end with turning everything over to electric vehicles or reducing VMT. You have that other problem on the other side. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer other than, this needs to be part of the conversation moving forward in a more substantial way.
And if I could just add, the electric vehicle legislation, S2232, does establish a working group or something, I don't know exact words that they use, to look at this issue. As the expansion of electric vehicles takes hold in New Jersey, then the reduced revenue stream for fixing the streets and bridges and roads they're traveling on, because they're not purchasing gas, becomes an issue, as we've highlighted, to look at possible solutions, one of them being a VMT tax or fee on an odometer, all those kinds of things. So the state is having the foresight to start to plan for that now. And that is going to be, I don't know when it's going to be established exactly. I'd have to look over the details, but that was part of the conversation.
Okay, great. Thanks to you both. Another question, how important is it for New Jersey DOT to take a more transit supportive stance when it comes to buses and bus lanes, and what will it take to get us there on that?
I saw that question pop up. I have to look at that again. More DOT taking more transit supportive stance. Well, there's right now, I think we're fighting over road space. There's been a lot of plans for BRT and for bus lanes, but we need to have the support not only of DOT, but of the municipality as well to welcome that kind of infrastructure into their town. With 565 municipalities on 6 miles of roadway, you might go through 12 towns. So I think the answer to that would be looking at a more corridor approach to how our buses are moving, to have them prioritized as they're moving through traffic, and a strong effort in moving forward with a lot of the BRT studies. There was one in Bergen County, which seems to have been shelved. There was a BRT study on Route 1 that went nowhere. I think that, I think New Jersey Transit right now is in the process of looking at their bus service. And I think now is the time to incorporate that kind of infrastructure into the plans moving forward.
Okay, great. Well, we have other good questions there. I'm going to keep us moving, and we're going to come back to some of these questions at the end. But I want to make sure we're able to hear from our other presenters. So thank you, Jana. I'm now going to turn it over to Kate Miguel at Isles to talk about re-envisioning transportation in practice, including Trenton's e-mobility project.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. My name is Kate Miguel. Just to give you guys a little bit of background on our organization, we are a community development and environmental nonprofit that works to foster self-reliant families and sustainable communities. So we have a very entrepreneurial approach when it comes to building programs to support this mission. We are very solutions oriented, so that has us, engaging with a lot of residents that in the communities that we work with. So we're very much on the ground. And we primarily work in Trenton, New Jersey. So today I am going to be giving you guys an overview of our Trenton e-mobility project. This consists of an electric vehicle car share program as well as an electric vehicle ride share program. So in a car share program, you're able to rent out a vehicle for a designated period of time. And then in a rideshare program, we hire people to drive, residents around. So kind of like an Uber and a Lyft. And the goals I would have to say of this program is really twofold. So one, it's to improve mobility in Trenton with the goal of increasing access to things like jobs, healthcare, and other essential resources that people are challenged with attaining today due to the lack of affordable and reliable transportation in the city. And the second focus is really to improve the health of our communities. I think, as we are electrifying our transportation system, we really believe that we need to take very deliberate action in making sure that low-income communities and underserved communities are really benefiting from this transition. And that's exactly what this requires. So that has to focus a lot on reducing air pollution in these communities. As you all know, I think, if you are a New Jersey resident, you should be somewhat familiar with the socioeconomic disparities that Trenton is challenged with. And one of that is air pollution. So just to give you guys like a brief example or small example, childhood asthma rates are 4 times higher in Trenton as compared to the rest of Mercer County. And if we go over to the next slide, you will see that in Trenton, there is a 27% poverty rate. 48% of households earn less than $35K a year. 30% are car-free households, and then 21% of residents have reported as using carpool as their main mode of transportation to work. So there is clearly a need for better transportation options. And the reason that we started, this project in the first place was because we met this challenge within our own organization. So through our Center for Energy and Environmental Training department, we actually work with a bunch of residents and have trained over 1,000 people in both community health and clean energy jobs. And we connect them to employers, but what we have seen is that a lot of these people who, go through these programs and work really hard to get these certificates, they are unable to hold on to those jobs simply because they don't have reliable transportation to actually get to those jobs. When we've had conversations with other community organizations in the city, they were also facing very similar challenges where they were unable to extend the social health and financial services that they were providing for low-income residents simply because they couldn't get to people and people couldn't get to them. So there is very much a need for this program. So moving on, the first step that we undertook is really making sure that we have the infrastructure to support this program. So that's having charging stations throughout the city. We did apply for a grant to the Department of Environmental Protection through a program called It Pays to Plug In. And I know these maps are a little bit small, but if you look at them, the way that we have chosen the locations for these charging stations, the goal of it is really to make sure, one, as much people as possible have access to this program. And we want to make sure that we're targeting the right people. The right people are able to access this program, right? So the way that we chose these site locations was, one, based on population density, and two, areas where the surrounding income was less than $50K a year. We also got a lot of feedback from community stakeholders and residents on areas that were, I myself am not a Trenton resident, so we did get input on, what were the known landmarks in the city where people would be comfortable and safe, feel safe in order to, access this program. So moving on from that, I think one thing I do want to add is, when it comes to this program, I think what's very unique about this is that we do want this to be very community driven. And that really entails, one, understanding what the community's needs are, right? So what Trenton needs is going to be very different from what Newark needs and from what Patterson needs. Even though they are all urban areas, they all have their own unique characteristics that we have to consider and their own residents who, know the city very well. It also requires partnerships with community organizations, and it requires that local stakeholders are part of, the development process when we are putting this program together. So we do have a very, very aggressive community outreach plan, which one consists of community partnership agreements, where we would be, working with different organizations in the city who have transportation challenges, and they would basically apply for the program, and we would, work out some way of helping them extend their services to residents. We will also be hosting about 3 to 5 community listening sessions, both open to residents as well as stakeholders. We have already started conducting surveys to residents and stakeholders, really to see the viability of this program and to see whether or not, a program like this would be welcomed by the residents. I think, when we think of electric vehicles, we think of it as something for the rich and suburban communities, which, there is definitely an argument to that. But I think if we frame this program right, it can really be beneficial to residents who really, really need it. And, the feedback that we received from these surveys was very interesting, because I think sometimes we get a little convoluted and things get a little bit complicated. And we forget that, if something if there is a solution to a problem, people will use it. And I think that's something that we do have to keep in mind. We also are going to have an ambassador recruitment program where we will be hiring trusted messengers in the city of Trenton to spread the word. We'll have a stakeholder advisory committee. So again, local organizations are able to participate in the program development process of this. And then we will also be hosting infrastructure demonstrations and community ride and drive, so people start to get comfortable with this program. So going to end it there. We are very much, in the early stages of this program. We're very excited and a little bit nervous as well, because this hasn't really been replicated in other areas of the country, although there are some, similar programs, but not exactly the same thing. But yeah, our focus is really to ensure that underserved and low-income communities are really benefiting from, our transition to an electric economy. And I think that takes deliberate action. I think a lot of people are constantly talking about, in this space, we're always talking about, how can we promote equity? How can we promote equity? And that's taking deliberate action, in my opinion. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kate, for sharing that really important perspective, and those statistics you shared about Trenton and the challenges that people face there. I think it's really important that you shared that, and that we all need to be keeping those challenges in mind as we're figuring out how to modernize the transportation system. It's not just about how do we get to those emissions reductions, but how do we do it in a way that really deals with those challenges and helps to bring greater equity and improve the lives of people that really need it. So thank you for that. I'm now going to turn it over to Ed Potosnik, who's going to give us a quick primer on some of the major kind of policy drivers right now in the state in terms of modernizing and electrifying our transportation sector. Then we'll come back to some questions after that.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Kate and Jana. Kate, that's really inspiring work happening in Trenton. It's a inspiration for other communities around the state. Hi, everyone. My name is Ed Potosnik. I am Executive Director of the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. And I'm really excited to be here today with you, with our partners from the Conservation Foundation, Rethink Energy, Tri-State Transportation Campaign, and ISLES. Just about New Jersey LCV, we represent Democratic, Republican, and independent voters who elect environmentally responsible candidates to state and local offices. And we also advocate for strong environmental policies and ultimately hold our elected officials accountable to safeguard the health of our communities, the beauty of our state, and the strength of our economy. So it's no doubt that New Jersey, from everything that you're hearing, has some strong and laudable goals to decarbonize our economy. And the goals are set forth in a number of different places, one being the updated Global Warming Response Act, another, the Clean Energy Act, and then there's a whole host of other administrative and legislative actions that are helping to create a policy framework to achieve emissions reductions. But one thing that we want to really emphasize today and remains true is that we can't meet our goals of reducing greenhouse gases and protecting people's health, preventing asthma and cancer, if we don't electrify our transportation sector. So going back to that great slide that Tom showed earlier, it's sort of an expansion of this. Where in the transportation sector are we actually getting the most greenhouse gas emissions from? So we see here, there's gasoline and there's diesel, gasoline being the largest contributor, but we can't forget that trucks and the diesel emissions, which also have a lot of co-pollutants. If you ever sat behind a diesel truck or a school bus and sucked in the diesel vapors, it's not a fun thing to do. And so we got to get away from that and help to address the climate crisis by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Luckily, we're already doing something about this. The recently engineered and released Energy Master Plan identified a number of strategies to reduce emissions and meet our goals. And it's going to come as no surprise that the first strategy was reducing our emissions from transportation. The Energy Master Plan indicates that increasing the number of electric vehicles in the short term on our roads is the most effective and efficient way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's also the easiest way to reduce localized air pollution that predominantly is burdening our environmental justice communities, who are low-income communities of color. And it shouldn't be done in a silo, but rather in tandem with expanding public transportation, all the things that Jana talked about. Modernizing our systems, increasing access to public transit services, while focusing on reducing car dependence and sprawl, and a culture, change the culture by investing in our downtown main streets, implementing walkable and bikeable complete streets. It's really important. And that being said, electric vehicles are the way to go in the short term. And EVs, by comparison to their conventional internal combustion engine counterparts, are 69 to 79% cleaner, regardless of the electricity generation source. So that's with our current mix today. You plug it into the grid, no special choice at home. It's 69 to 79% cleaner, which is good news. There are more than 167,000 children with asthma living in New Jersey, and the American Lung Association is routinely rating New Jersey's air quality as unsatisfactory or failing. And fortunately, that these changes on our electrifying our transportation sector are also going to yield many economy-wide financial and health benefits. So together, it's good for our bottom line, and it's good for our hearts, our lungs, and our minds. So to meet these emissions goals and reduce emissions swiftly from the transportation sector, the Energy Master Plan and something called the Integrated Energy Master Plan in New Jersey, we must ensure that by 2035, new light duty purchases are entirely electric. And by 2050, 100% of our light duty fleet is electric. And hopefully we can even increase this faster, our heavy duty vehicles are also electrified. So, where do we go from here? Some folks may heard, a lot of local efforts on this. The EMP calls out these near-term strategies to guide our transition, but they're not going to happen on their own. So luckily, we work with a number of partners and leadership of the legislature in New Jersey to bring us a step closer to achieving these goals and by implementing these strategies. And that was the EV law that we heard about a little earlier. It's an ambitious electric vehicle legislation. It's the strongest and most ambitious in America, S2252, which was signed into law January 17th. It's a key component that drives that change that we need to see, specifically addressing a number of issues and putting key pieces in place. First, the bill addresses what many customers say is a major impediment to buying an EV, and that's range anxiety. So you get in your car, can you make it where you want and back? So this bill helps to establish a framework for a nation-leading fast charging network in key transportation hotspots throughout the state. Therefore, if you travel from North Jersey to South Jersey, from Trenton to the shore, Atlantic City to Lake Apacon, you're not going to have to worry about running out of a charge. Expanding that charging infrastructure will also create good local jobs that can't be outsourced and drive private investment in our state. So in addition, the bill creates a rebate program, which you may have heard about, for plug-in electric vehicles up to $5,000 per vehicle. And it prevents wealthy New Jerseyans from receiving the rebates on expensive cars that have doors that go open sideways and everything else. It has an MSRP limit on vehicles over $55,000. And the rebates help to address that small upfront increase in cost that some EVs have over their ICE internal combustion engine counterparts. In addition, there's no sales tax on an electric vehicle. So those two benefits together are pretty big. And another one is you save about $2,000 a family by buying an EV over our current gas prices when the electricity to have it. So we're going to try to share a link for you so you can see the different cars and what you get back for EV rebates. But New Jersey has a goal of having 330,000 on the road by 2025. So just in the next 5 years. And there's only, I think less than 20,000 on the road today. Lastly, Jenna mentioned this, but the bill also puts New Jersey Transit on a swift path to electrify the entire bus fleet by nearly 2040, ensuring that all new bus purchases after 2032 are electric. And then this is a big deal for environmental justice communities where these buses are traveling that are plagued by poor air quality and particulate matter from diesel exhaust. In addition, it sets a framework for ensuring that our entire state's light-duty fleet electrifies. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. But really, we can't stop there. We need to leverage other opportunities to catalyze a full-scale change that we need to see in our transportation sector, particularly with electric vehicles. So New Jersey has done some other things. We entered the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and the revenues that are coming in from that are going to directly fund a number of programs to reduce localized pollution through diesel retrofits and electrification, and expand our electrification and help to reduce the vehicle's miles traveled. So like rideshare programs, as Kate described. And just 2 weeks ago, Governor Murphy signed the second of two memorandums of understanding as part of the California Zero Emission Vehicle Program to join 15 states and DC to spearhead the electrification of the polluters on the road, our cars, our heavy duty vehicles. And lastly, to keep something your eye on, there's something called the Transportation Climate Initiative, which offers New Jersey, through another regional framework, an opportunity to raise revenue to further drive our transition to a clean, modernized, electrified transportation future by putting a price on polluters and investing in efforts to expand public transit access. So I'm going to send that back to you, Tom.
Great, Ed, thank you. So we have a couple minutes left for questions. There were a few people who asked about the prospects for federal funding for green transportation, and perhaps with the upcoming election in mind. So do Ed, you or any of the other panelists want to comment on the prospects for that?
I think the prospects are very high. If Biden is elected president, he rolled out a $2 trillion investment plan in green, clean energy. And I think we're going to see what has been, under the Trump administration, a rollback to hugging coal. And I think there might have been other things like asbestos, these old things that really pollute people and cause them health problems, to things that really folks want. They want cleaner air. And if you look back at photos in America to when we used coal in our cities and the haze that existed and the scarves people had around their mouth, different than coronavirus and protecting each other. The air was toxic to breathe. So that's his vision. We've been dealing with that for 4 years. Voters are going to have a chance this November to do something different. I hope they make a different choice. I know a lot of us are focused on that. And we can go forward building on progress before. I mean, we've lost a lot of time. We've gone backwards, and we can't afford to do that. But there's a whole bunch of projects like that that could change. And the federal government needs to be part of the solution in moving to electrification of our vehicles. Transportation is what we're talking about today, but also our homes and generation, all those different sectors.
Great, thanks, Ed. So let's See, we have maybe a minute or so left, and I'm trying to determine which of these great questions to address. Have any of the panelists seen a question in the chat box that you would really like to answer? I might just throw it open to you.
There's one, you guys should chime in too. I don't see their cameras on, but there was one about hydrogen fuel cells. In middle school, I fell in love with them. I'm a chemist. I saw buses in Canada where water you could drink came out of the tailpipe. Hydrogen mixes with hydrogen in a little tank, mixes with oxygen in the air, and you get water, H2O, as a product. And that is it. I mean, there's some stuff on like how they have to mine some of the materials, but altogether, the total impact on the environment is very low. It hasn't taken off in New Jersey. The only thing I can figure, and we're supportive of it, is that we had the Hindenburg, which was filled with hydrogen and it blew up. And somehow people are just not very excited. We have one hydrogen fueling station in the whole state. We don't sell the Honda Clarity, the only hydrogen car available to the public. We're way behind. And there was a bill that was passed to set up a task force on this. It's like a battery. Hydrogen is the fuel source you can refill. So it is part of the mix, and we should be definitely promoting that as well. And I think it will be in the future a really strong part of our solution. But remember, it makes electricity. So EVs in general, they don't care like with the fuel sources, whether it's a battery or you plug it in. You know, we do have to be careful with our policies, whether we call it a plug-in electric vehicle or just an electric vehicle. And the EV bill was really careful about that to try to promote both.
Excellent. Well, it's just after 2, so I'm afraid we're going to have to end this this really good conversation. But we hope that this is not the end of the conversation, and that you all will remain involved and get involved with one or more of these great organizations that are leading the charge in modernizing our transportation system. Just want to remind everyone that we'll be sending out a link to a recording of this webinar to everyone that registered. We want to thank you all again for joining. We want to thank our great speakers today, and please stay tuned for future webinars in this series. Thanks to everyone for joining, and thanks for being part of creating a clean energy future in New Jersey.
Thank you very much.